Hey everybody, welcome back to another Decklab video for once, where, I fairly briefly rate the decks that, get sent in. You can obviously still send in your decks as well as replays for me to, take a look at, rank, rate, whatever you want. So, we got a Polish deck here for ranked. Now, obviously, I think most people are aware, not ideal for ranked, especially since Eastern Bloc and Baltic Front are basically objectively stronger. Not objectively, because you get 5 more activation points, you get an availability bonus, yada yada yada. But for all intents and purposes, they're better. But whoever sent this in, the individual, is very much aware of that. That's fine. And they said, they know they're making life hard on them, and that's fine. So I'm gonna rate this Polish deck. That's fine. And I don't always have to, try hard. You don't always have to try hard, right? Play however you want. Now, as long as you're aware that Poland is worse than coalitions and such, most of the coalitions at least, and you're hampering yourself, do whatever you want. I don't mind. So, the biggest disadvantage that Poland has, and the individual that sent this into me is very much aware of that, is the lack of a mortar. Might be the only national deck that has no mortar, if I'm not mistaken, which is annoying because even outside of like smoking your tanks, mortars are just very, very useful to have. You can somewhat make up for it though. Every howitzer, of course, has the ability to smoke. So do a few MLRS systems, in this case the RM70. Now MLRS smoke is a bit different because MLRS systems, after using the salvo, have to reload for a long time, right? So you have the downtime between that. It's more of a niche scenario where you actually use the smoke, but we'll get to that. We should start logistics though. I don't really see any issue here. CVs are a bit expensive, right? You don't have like cheaper CVs, but 135 isn't that bad. 160 is still workable. It's fine. And you get 4 infantry CVs thanks to the availability bonus. I really don't see an issue with this choice, Everything is fine. Infantry tab. They did mention that, I don't like Spadochroniarche. I also got told the Z is pronounced like a Z, or something similar like that. I don't like them as much, and yes, that's very much true, but if I were to play Poland, I would certainly also put them in, because that's the only decent AT you get. So, and I'm not saying they're bad. They're okay. For 20 points, 24 AP is good. So you definitely want that card. It's a good choice. Gromine Promet is great. Fagot in the MS-17. Might want to down with those if you're feeling spicy, because then I have the same veteran C as infantry CV, and you might be able to screw your opponent with that, or give them wrong information, or make them think false, make them jump to false conclusions. But that's maybe a bit too much. Of course, veterancy helps for the Fagots to actually hit. These are fine. Piora Smash in the Topaz 2A. I have to admit, I've very, very rarely used this. But as it stands, you don't really have cheap fire support. I mean, if you like in cheap fire support and this does a good job for you, I guess sure, go ahead. But I wouldn't use this. For armor is okay, but you have poor optics for 25 point IFV is not so great. You can expect to have medium optics at that price point. 55k mage is really not that good. It's not like slow, but can be annoying. You only have a base conquerors. The autocannon is fine, right? But certainly not as good as what you get for 25 points in other decks. I really don't think this is a very, very good card. Since you get line infantry, sure, it's cheap, but you also only come in hard and not veteran or elite. You're better off either getting another card and getting him a 5-pointer for some much, or like even cheaper spam. Alternatively, you can run Sapersi Szturmowi if you feel like you need something in towns that can really murder infantry, or Spadochroniarche. Fine as well. Even Strelci Podalansky, I don't know, I'm sorry. They're also fine. The Metis got buffed, and I think they got a 5-point price buff. So you have some nice options. Yeah, I mean, yeah, most of the nothing really was talking about the infantry and what was sent to me. I would really skip this. Plus, you can get 80 gems with the T72S. Sure, you paid 125 points, but it's also much better 80 GM. I don't think that's a good option. So if you really want some 80 GM, just use. I mean, sure, it's not the same thing. It's not on a vehicle and has less range, but yeah. You have Formosa. I'm thinking what this deck might need the most. You could use some helo drop infantry, but nothing that Poland has is really great for that. So Honards and the MS-17 honestly don't work too great. I think you might be best off with these because they're, I wouldn't say they're niche, right? But you can't always get them to the front line. If there's AA or something. So I think a card of those is probably best. But I just got to keep them cheap. I would keep them in the base squad too. 20 points isn't. You also get better availability for sure. 20 points isn't that expensive for them, and so the 5 points cheaper is reasonably noticeable, I would say. And the KBVT, it's a better KBVT with 15% accuracy, but it still only comes at 1 armor. And since you actually do have to pay 5 points, right? Since you have the option of 10-point transport, definitely go for this because you're very, very rarely actually gonna get value out of this or be in a situation where this does something that this can't really do, right? And I think more often than not, the 5 points over the course of the game or in the opener especially are more useful to save and put in something else. Personally, I would probably run them in the 5-pointer, but I have to admit I haven't really tried spamming them that much. So maybe it's actually pretty good. Next up, support. Yeah, I did mention smoke. One thing you have to keep in mind about smoke rounds of howitzers, smoke has half the aim time, right? So the Dana, which typically has 30 seconds aim time for its HE rounds, actually only has a 15 seconds aim time for the smoke rounds. The rate of fire is still exactly the same, but you only have to aim for 15 seconds. And then after the full salvo, also only to reload for 15 seconds as well, as opposed to 30 seconds. Now that also means that the Goshchik, whatever of those three, has a basic aim time of 25 seconds and a smoke aim time of 12 seconds. So if you're mainly worried about smoke, I would use this piece, the 2S1. I'm just gonna call it the 2S1. It has less range, of course, and a low dispersion, granted. Yeah, 3 seconds isn't really a big deal, but then again, 12 seconds is still pretty long compared to mortars, but it's not like you have a better option. This, of course, has a 35 seconds aim time, and as such, the smoke aim time is 17 seconds. So that's the worst part. BM21 grad, it did get cheaper, and it is cheaper to use, i.e. the individual rockets are not great. I would still go for the RM70. Up or downward, RM70 serves you better. Faster aim time allows you to, be more precise because you don't have to like pre-aim or anything like that. But most importantly, while yes, it only fires 20 instead of 40, the grad has to reload for 240 seconds after using its 40 rounds. And that means that if you're not, that only once you actually start refilling it with ammo, right? If you empty it, but first have to drive back to a fob, the 240 seconds only start counting down once you have, are actually resupplying it. Whereas the RM70 reloads after 80 seconds. So if we take aim time, an additional 20 seconds of aim time into consideration, 40 rounds in 180 seconds versus, and then you're ready for the next 20 already, right? or I guess 200 seconds. Whereas here you fire with a longer aim time, and the individual rockets also come out slower with 0.6 seconds in between versus 0.2 here. So you have just much better firepower. And sometimes, given that you don't really have a mortar or a cheap fast aim time smoke unit, I would expect that in Poland you would also make use of the smoke capabilities on this more often. Despite the buff, the Armor 70 is honestly still the better option, for sure. I think if you, for your, I don't even know why, it's just, for your dedicated, single point smoke, I would probably still use the Dana, simply because it has more ammo. What I mean with that is, you don't park this, if you use this mainly for smoke, don't park this next to the fob, drive it relatively close to the front line, right? Because if you fire from back where your fob is, the round obviously has to travel much further than if you're right behind the front line. It carries more ammo, so it can fire more smoke rounds before having to reload. It's faster as well, although that's not a big deal. So yeah, probably use this while it takes 3 seconds longer and has more rounds. And just use it next to the front line, honestly. That's what I would do. A setup is fine. You have the Grom, so you're not really in the need of something like this, or a Strela. Could consider downvoting this, because I always run out of these, because I love using them. But if 5 is enough for you, that's obviously perfectly fine. The other thing that was mentioned was M2 Wilk versus T72S. I don't remember if I ranked this higher than a T72S. But at least these days, in case I didn't back when I did the rating video, I definitely agree with the comment that they made, which was they felt that T72S is more like a side grid of the M2 Wilk. I still personally prefer the M2 Wilk in most scenarios because of the 9 RPM, but I would agree with the sentiment of this being more of a side grid. More armor, better speed, as well as acceleration and deceleration, which isn't shown. So overall, better survivability. Side armor is mostly irrelevant. The extra front armor is more valuable than a lot of the side armor. And of course the sphere. So yeah, using T72S over M2 Wilk, A-okay. Tank type, of course, perfectly fine. If 2 Wilks or 2 Twardies are enough for you, that's fine. I guess given that you don't have a mortar to protect your heaviest tank, you probably don't use them that much anyway. Although you could also make the argument that, since you're more likely to lose them with lack of smoke, you might need more. I don't know. Recon tab. Yeah, it's fine. Here's the thing, BRDM2, underrated unit, I do love seeing it. You could also run the BTR-40A, it depends on what you want to do with it. If you mainly want to use it around flanks, sneaking around, stuff like that, get it behind lines, and the KPVT is secondary, you mainly just want to spot stuff, and with your amazing autonomy and speed, just sneak through, like spot stuff in base, something like that, and you only really use it if you see something that can't really fire back, then BRDM2 is better. If your main thing is just using it in openers, even escorting your Scott 2s or something with just masses of KPVTs, then you're better off with the BTR-48, because the CP2 is actually quite good, significantly better than the KPVT. Rate of fire is quite a bit better. Suppression is much higher, and you even have a much better helicopter range. But if you use this, let's say, offensively, go for the BTR-40A. Like 4 or 5 of those against other wheel stuff that isn't KTs or something like that can actually do quite some damage. Since I don't know, I'm gonna leave the BRDM2 in there. But I just want to say that if you want something cheap that actually has surprisingly good firepower, BTR-40A is the way to go. Of course, it is not amphibious and has much worse autonomy, which is why if you wanna be sneaky, get behind enemy lines, drive around the map, BRDM2 is of course much better. You're gonna run out of autonomy otherwise. T55, I think is also a bit underrated. Most people I think would go for the PT76, but this has armor and this is a cheap way to have defensive recon unit with armor, right? Sure, it hits less. and has no MG, but you know, a single autocannon vehicle or something is gonna have a tough time killing this. And you know, rocket bots as well. Ramosa for town fighting, I presume. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan, but you don't have that much choice, and since there's no other amazing units that you really need to fit in there, I think having a card of them can be really, really, really useful at times. Yeah, I guess it's fine to run them on leads. The SMG is gonna definitely benefit from that, and the RPK, although you should use the Paladin over the RPK, of course. Yeah. I assume that you're probably gonna use them, you know, at single, maybe 2 stacks at best for like getting towns or fighting in towns, and then that's it. And then for scouting themselves, just Sviatowski. I would really suggest using them in the squads too, because as soon as these things go off road, they're just slow as shit. And given that they're not typically spammed, I don't think 5 points are gonna make a huge difference here. But then again, you do you. It's not objectively wrong or anything, but you know, as soon as anything pops them, they're also dead because this has no armor and 5 HP. Salamandra, of course. Yeah, since the only other helicopter is this, you might as well pay the 20 extra points and have an offensive helicopter as well. I don't really see any problems with this. You could go for the ASU, then you would have your cheap fire support covered, although I guess you could also use the ZSU. If this thing gets into range with enemy infantry is gonna be like instantly stunned and panicked, right? It's just that it's really bad against vehicles, it's slow, it has no optics. And you have to get much closer than you have to with this, right? But it can be surprisingly good. It's actually much better against infantry than it is against helicopters, let alone planes. Yeah. This, I'm pretty sure it doesn't, but I just want to make sure. This fires like just straight up once every, what's 7 rounds? Like 8 point something seconds. It has an actual, yeah, it fires every 8 seconds. Yeah, okay. Just make sure that it's not some weird semi-autoloader or something. Helicopters. Yeah, basically the only 2 helicopters you really have access to. Upwitted, good choice. Planes. I mean, yeah, they're kind of must-haves. MiG-21 BIS for Hero Hunter. MiG-21F. Yeah. Could also go for this. But I mean, you have the rocket pods covered with a 21MF. Only comes at Harden, which is unfortunate. You come in Veteran. The BIS has better ECM though. I mean, the thing is, you're rarely gonna get more than 2 missiles, realistically more than 2 missiles off at once. So the extra missile count is not really gonna be that useful. First, somehow target with better ECM. Let me briefly check the actual accuracy on them, you know, given the veterancy. MiG-21 BIS, which comes at hardened, has an actual accuracy of 60%. MiG-21, what's that? MiG-23 MF, which comes on veteran, has an actual accuracy of 54%. So the MiG-21 BIS has 6% more accuracy. I'd probably still go for the MF, because it doubles as an O, and it's gonna be better versus planes because of the R23Rs. It's, despite the worse turn radius, it might actually be a bit better versus helicopters because of its slightly lower speed. Giving it a bit more time in range and, you know, having the proper angle versus helicopters. I'd personally really go for the MF. The MiG-21 BIS is already a not so great helicopter hunter, so you're gonna be a bit worse, but you have the added bonus of also being an anti-plane plane, right? I think that's a better choice. Yeah, you don't really have a lot of choice. So yeah, I didn't really do much with this deck, but it's just for one because it was already a very solid deck to begin with. But technically, also you don't really have a lot of choices, right? The other T-72s aren't really worth talking about. I mean, I mentioned them to work, right? And yeah, it was already a very solid deck and not much more to be done with this. So yeah, hope you still enjoyed it. Feel free to send in more decks, of course. Links in the description for decks and replays. And I'll hopefully see you next time. Later.